Hi all, AD here from Jaunts and Jaunts. As always, thank you so much for clicking on the video. Today I'm in deepest, darkest Sussex and I'm at Pevensey Castle. Now this was built back in 290 AD. Yes, you heard me correctly, 290 AD. It was a Roman fortress and it was used all the way up until the Second World War. And it was also where William the Conqueror and his army spent the night before they marched on in 1066 to Hastings for the Great Battle. So let's go and have a look around. Walking through the grounds today on this beautiful summer's day, it's hard to imagine that this peaceful place once witnessed some of the most important events in English history, because this isn't just another medieval castle. This is where England changed forever. Now, long before these medieval walls were built, long before knights, kings and sieges, this was already an ancient place, and its story stretches back nearly 2,000 years. The Romans arrived here around the late 3rd century, at a time when Britain faced increasing attacks from Saxon pirates crossing the Channel, and to defend the coastline they built a series of enormous forts known as the Saxon Shore Forts. Pevensey was then called Anderetium, and it became one of the largest. The walls they built were astonishing, and some still stand today, and I will show you those at the end of the video. They're 9 meters high and several meters thick. They've survived almost 1700 years of weather, warfare and neglect. Today Pevensey Castle sits inland, but during Roman times this area would have been surrounded by water and marshland, and that created a natural defensive island. Now any enemy ships would have found it extremely difficult to approach the castle unnoticed. But even after the Romans eventually left Britain around AD 410, those massive stone walls remained empty, silent and waiting for history to return. And return it certainly did, and perhaps the most famous moment in the castle's long story happened in September 1066. William, Duke of Normandy, crossed the English Channel with an invasion fleet thought to number around 700 ships, and after what must have been a very anxious crossing, his army landed nearby, and many historians believe that William himself came ashore just a short distance from where I'm standing now in the castle. So can you imagine the scene? The hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers, horses being unloaded, weapons, armour, supplies, an entire invasion force arriving on English soil. And although it's difficult for us to picture that today, this quiet corner of Sussex suddenly became the centre of one of history's most famous military campaigns, and the locals must have been absolutely terrified to have seen all of that arrive near their homes. William and his forces quickly occupied the old Roman fort. Even after 6 centuries, these ancient walls still offered them some valuable protection, and from here William began his march inland. Less than 3 weeks later, the Battle of Hastings took place. King Harold was killed, and William became William the Conqueror, and England would never be the same again. And it's fascinating to think that everything leading up to that famous battle began right here. And thousands of visitors head to Hastings every year. I have actually been to battle. You'll find that video on my channel if you're interested, and that's said to be where the battle took place, although that is disputed by a lot of historians nowadays. Following the conquest, William recognised just how strategically important this castle remained, and rather than demolish the Roman fort, the Normans cleverly built an entirely new stone castle, but they did it inside the old Roman walls. So instead of starting from scratch, they used the ancient Roman defences that had already stood the test of time. And it really is a remarkable combination of two completely different eras. Roman engineering surrounding Norman military architecture, and nearly 1,000 years separating the two, yet both still stand together today. And as we walk through the grounds, it's almost like walking through many layers of history. There's Roman Britain, followed by Anglo-Saxon England, the Norman Conquest, the Middle Ages, all existing in this one place, and the Norman keep that once dominated the centre of the castle. And although now it's largely ruined, it would originally have been an imposing symbol of Norman authority, a clear message to anyone who questioned William's rule. The castle didn't simply become a royal residence, it became an important military fortress, and over the centuries it has witnessed numerous sieges, and one of the most famous came in 1088. Following William the Conqueror's death, England was thrown into political turmoil. Supporters of William's eldest son rebelled against the new king, William Rufus, and Pevensey Castle here became one of the key strongholds in the rebellion. Royal forces surrounded the castle, and the siege dragged on for weeks, and food supplies inevitably began to run low. The defenders became increasingly desperate, but finally starvation forced them to surrender. And it's remarkable how often castles, when defeated through dramatic battles, quite often victory simply came from waiting, and the castle continued to evolve throughout the medieval period. These new towers were added, the gatehouses were strengthened, and defences were improved, so every generation adapted here to meet new military threats. And walking around today, we can still spot evidence of these changes if you look carefully. There's different stonework, there's some blocked up doorways, alterations that have been made centuries apart. It's almost like reading a history book written in stone. And one thing I always find fascinating about visiting places like this is trying to imagine what everyday life would have been like for the everyday people. We often think about the kings and the battles, but castles were communities within themselves. I think of the soldiers that stood guard through freezing winter nights, the blacksmiths that would have repaired the armour, the servants who would have toiled and cooked meals over open fires. There would have been families, children of the workers playing within these walls, messengers coming and going, carrying urgent news, and merchants arriving with supplies. And let's not forget about the chapel and the priests that would have held services, and life would have carried on here even when there wasn't any war going on. Thousands upon thousands of ordinary lives unfolded here, and most of them now have been completely forgotten. I'm just now going to head into the exhibition. It's a permanent exhibition here at the castle, and it's really interesting. Now, if it is of interest to you, I'm going to pause very briefly on each of the information boards so you can pause the video and read if you wish to do so. And if you're not interested, then you can just fast forward through this bit. During the 13th century, Pevensey Castle briefly became associated with one of England's most dramatic political prisoners, because King Henry III imprisoned Simon de Montfort's son here following the Second Barons' War. So the castle's thick walls weren't just designed to keep enemies out, sometimes they were used to keep important prisoners in. And later, during the 100 Years' War, England again feared invasion from France. Pevensey found itself back on the front line again. Its coastal position once more made it very strategically valuable. So additional repairs strengthened the ageing fortress, and despite many centuries passing, military technology was changing, and castles gradually became less effective against powerful artillery, and cannons completely transformed warfare. So the walls that had once seemed indestructible suddenly became vulnerable. Like so many medieval castles across Britain, Pevensey slowly lost its military importance, and nature gradually reclaimed parts of the site. Roofs disappeared, buildings collapsed, and stone was reused elsewhere. Centuries of changing fortunes. And many would have thought that was the end of Pevensey and its military history, but remarkably, it found itself serving Britain once again during the Second World War. So nearly 900 years after William the Conqueror had landed nearby, another invasion threatened England. But this time it was Nazi Germany, and the castle once again became part of Britain's coastal defences. And we're going to head in a moment to another display, which is all about Pevensey and the role that it played in World War II. So please do pause on each of the information boards if you'd like a more detailed explanation about exactly what went on here during the Second World War. I'll give you a brief overview. So they installed machine gun positions and concrete pillboxes here on the site, and they were done remarkably well because they're camouflaged and they actually look like they're part of the castle. And I loved looking at these photographs. Aren't they remarkable? So please do pause if you're interested and have a look. And I do wonder about all these men and how many of them never came home. Troops actually occupied this ancient site. History had come full circle, and just as the Roman soldiers once watched the coastline, modern British soldiers did exactly the same thing, but they were separated by almost 17 centuries, yet they were performing remarkably similar duties, and I really find that extraordinary. There's very few places, I think, that can claim such an unbroken military story stretching from Roman Britain to the 20th century. I might be wrong about that, but please do let me know in the comments if there are any other sites around Britain that have got such an extensive, unbroken military history. One of the things that makes Pevensey Castle feel so special isn't just its history, it's the fact that so much of the history is still standing right here in front of us. The Roman walls here have stood for almost 1700 years. They've witnessed the end of Roman Britain, the arrival of Saxons, William the Conqueror's invasion, medieval sieges, civil unrest, and even preparations for another possible invasion during the Second World War. And like I said, very few places in England can tell such a long and remarkable story. As I wander around the castle today, it's easy to focus on the ruined towers and the medieval buildings, but for me it was really the Roman walls that quietly stole the show. Stone by stone, they outlived emperors, kings, kingdoms, generations of people who could never have imagined they'd still be standing here nearly 2 millennia later. It's quite a humbling thought, but it also completely blows my mind, and I really do never take it for granted. I feel like it's a real privilege to live here and to be able to go out and explore these wonderful places. And for me, growing up, I always thought of history as something like distant, locked away in books or museums, and I found it incredibly boring. But for me, walking alongside it really does bring it to life. To run my hand across the same stone that a Roman soldier once touched, stand where Norman knights once stood, and to be able to look out across that landscape that has witnessed some of the most important moments in English history, and to think about all those boats that would have arrived with William the Conqueror all those centuries ago, it just completely blows my mind. I think Pevensey is one of the best castles that I have visited in England, and it's really left a lasting impression on me. It's not because it's the biggest castle or the grandest, but it's because it has survived century after century, and it has simply remained watching history unfold around it. And as I take one last walk alongside these remarkable Roman walls, it's hard not to wonder what they would say if they could speak, what stories have been lost to time, and how many thousands of people have passed this way before us, and how many more will stand here in the centuries still to come. I do hope you enjoyed our visit to Pevensey Castle. Wasn't it a fascinating place? And if you did, if you could please like, subscribe, hit the hype button, hit the notification bell so you'll be informed when the next one is published, I really would appreciate it. And there's a hype button down below as well. All free, but it really helps the channel out. And I just want to take the opportunity, if you've made it this far, to say thank you so much for watching. It truly means everything to me. Starting this channel has changed my life, and I'm not being dramatic there. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye for now.